Often, enslaved Africans escaped their plantations and found refuge with Native American tribes, learning their languages and assimilating culturally.
These people are not here lawfully. They need to do what our ancestors did, what many Mexicans have done, many, don't interrupt
your
me.
Your ancestors came here illegally. Wasn't nothing legal about your ancestors.
Listen.
They came illegally and they murdered, they raped, they pillaged a whole race of people. This country, Texas, Arizona, and California, belongs to Mexicans.
Juanel, get back
it was
to the
stole from them.
You tell me to get back to the point.
They came here.
No, you're not being fair to me here. You say stay on topic. I say, okay, we'll stay on topic. And then as soon as we start talking about illegal immigration, you go back to the black issue. Let's stay on topic. Now back to the black issue. Let's stay on topic.
You got a death question. What harm can it be to have my picture in the paper? That ain't none of your concern. It's twins from Mexicans and white folks. That ain't none of your concern. It's twins from Mexicans and white folks. Get out my face, shit. You don't know what the fuck you talking about.
Was simply to show illustrations of how the Indians looked according to first-hand accounts. However, little did I know that the topic of Indians and Israelites was such a hot-button topic. So with that in mind, we'll take a closer look at the American Indians, Israelites, and giants. Now, we won't go into great detail about the different types of Indians. However, we will give a brief high-level overview of the different types of Indians. For example, our first type of Indian are the Mongoloid type of Indians. And you can find this phenotype or this type of Indian in the Meet the Indian video. In general, these Indians are dark-skinned, they have straight hair, and they usually have Asian features, similar to the Eskimo.
The United States government is offering you a piece of land of your own.
We have our own land.
No, it's not yours. It's the U.S. government's.
Did they buy it?
No.
Did they trade for it?
It's not like that.
Then how can they own it?
He has a point.
If you accept our offer, you won't have to hunt buffalo anymore or roam the prairie. You can depend on your country to take care of you.
You are not my country.
We will give you everything you need if you will just submit to living on a reservation.
We need nothing from you.
Mr. Durant, if we could just...
I'm done, Reverend.
This type of Indian or American Indian is well documented. All right, now our second type of Indian shown in our Meet the Indian video are Hamitic Indians. Now these Indians are also dark-skinned, however, they have woolly hair and they usually wear little to no clothing. And their features and customs appear Hamitic. And then the third type of Indian, and apparently the most controversial, is the Israelite Indian. Now this phenotype is also shown in the video. Now these Indians are dark-skinned, they are clothed, and usually their clothes have fringes, and they usually practice Israel-like customs. In fact, early writers wrote various theories regarding their origin in the Americas. For example, we can find these theories in John Ogilvy's book. And let's take a look. Now on page 27, and this is John Ogilvy's book of America being an accurate description of the New World. So on page 27, a little ways down from the top, it reads, "Some would derive the Americans from the Jews, others from the 10 tribes of Israel, carried into captivity, the ground of which opinions is that the Jews and Israelites were scattered amongst all the nations. Therefore, they conclude that America was also peopled by them. The rather, because the ancient Jews and Americans were of one complexion. In other words, they were both dark-skinned and went a like habitat, or in other words, they dressed the same, both going without shoes, onely wearing sandals, and an upper coat over a short linen vest. Both are humble, quick of apprehension, and obliging yet valiant. But it is certain they cannot be like the Jews, because the Americans change their habit according as they live in cold or hot countries, and go not in the least like one another. All right, so that's one example of an opinion of the origin of these Israelite Indians. Now let's turn the page and read a second opinion as to the origin of these Israelite Indians. And it reads, a small seeming testimony is added, being taken out of the 4th book of Ezra, that the 10 tribes of Israel that were carried away by Salmanassar with their king Hosea to Nahala harbor, the river Gozan, and the cities of the Medes might be acknowledged for the first planters of America, concerning which Ezra says thus, the 10 tribes brought over into another country consulted that they should forsake the multitude of the heathens and travel to a remoter country where no generation of mankind had ever lived before. Where no generation of mankind had ever lived before. Where no generation of mankind had ever lived before.
See, my issue with, Dr. Claude Anderson with this video, he's, painting the picture that, American Indians are the Asiatics that came over the Bering Strait with the straight hair and Asiatic features that's similar to, Chinese people, Japanese people, and Koreans. But that's not the case, and we already know that. We know that we are the Paleo-Indians or Paleo-Americans, the mound builders, who had built the mounds before the Native Americans got here. But what they're trying to paint is that all black people, or so-called black people, that's in the United States and throughout the Americas, they're trying to make it seem as though all people that was classified as black, that they are of African descent, and that's not the case. Because the majority of the people that was reclassified as black are American Indians or Paleo Indians. Okay? And so that's the issue that I have with.
There they would maintain their laws, which they had not observed in their countries, whereupon they went thither through the narrow entrances of the river Euphrates. For the Almighty stopped the veins of the river till they were passed over. For through the country was a way of a year and a half's journey. Wherefore that tract of land is called Azarus. Then they lived there till the last time. All right, so I won't read the rest of that. You can read it if you want. But this is just another example of an opinion of the origin of these Israelite Indians. Now let's read a third example of an origin of these Israelite, and it reads, Emmanuel de Moraes, who had gotten peculiar knowledge of the Americans by his long conversation with them, judges that they are not derived from one people, but from the Carthaginians and Jews, and that at several times the places they landed in this new world, for the Carthaginians sailing thither found the soil so fertile that many forsook their native country to dwell there, whereupon it was forbidden upon the pain of death to send no more thither, lest if Carthage should be invaded by a foreign army, it should want people for a home defense. For this occasion it happened that those that were already transported became rude and of salvage disposition, and spreading their families planted the desolate countries in ranging manner, without acknowledging any supreme head or government. Thus, being scattered up and down everyone invented to himself a new language, which should neither agree with the Carthaginians or any other. But this opinion is before at large contradicting. All right. So you can at least see that there were many different theories or opinions as to explain these Israelite Indians in the Americas. So make no mistake, they were in America and people were writing about them.
One strand of history that is often not taught to us is the complex relationship between Native Americans and African Americans. Did you know that some Native American tribes had slaves? There are almost 600 Native American tribes legally recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the United States. During the colonial period, there were 5 tribes who at the time were known as the 5 civilized tribes. They were the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole. Members of these 5 tribes all had enslaved Africans, some of whom were with the tribes during the Trail of Tears in 1830, when 60,000 Native Americans were forcibly relocated to a specially designated Indian territory west of the Mississippi River. There has been intercultural exchange and intermarriage between Native Americans and African Americans since at least the 17th century. Interracial relationships were known to have taken place between Native Americans and Africans. Often, enslaved Africans escaped their plantations and found refuge with Native American tribes, learning their languages and assimilating culturally. Some tribes actively encouraged mixing with Africans, as it was believed this union would result in stronger offspring. This became such a cause for concern to European authorities that in South Carolina, several laws were passed to restrict Native Americans and African Americans' proximity to each other. The Europeans actively tried to incite hostility between the two populations to avoid alliances that threatened the status quo of slavery-era America. In 1866, following the American Civil War, the 5 tribes were required by the American government to emancipate their slaves and grant them membership into their tribes as freedmen. Many of these African Native American freedmen played important political roles in their tribal nations as interpreters and negotiators. African Native Americans coexisted with Native Americans for generations until in the late 20th and 21st centuries, some nations decided to tighten their membership. A famous example was in 1975 when the Cherokee Nation drafted its constitution, which resulted in many Cherokee freedmen being ousted. The fallout was an ugly political struggle, and some descendants of Cherokee freedmen even took their cases to the Supreme Court. In 2006, the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma also excluded around 2,000 black Seminoles who could not prove their descent from a Native American ancestor on the Dawes Rolls, an 1893 commission which had registered and allotted land to members of the 5 tribes. The issue was that many African Native Americans had been registered as African American, regardless of their genetic, linguistic, and cultural affiliation with their respective Indian nation. There have been accusations from African Native Americans that these efforts to exclude them were racially motivated, due to the tribes wanting to preserve gambling revenues from Native American casinos for fewer people. That said, there are a handful of staunch African Native Americans who continue to campaign for their right to be formally recognized and reintegrated into their respective tribes. Will they be reinstated? Only time will tell.
So let's do a brief recap of what we've learned so far. So we learned that the Americas had the Mongoloid type Indians who were dark-skinned, had straight hair, and usually had Asian features. And then the second type of Indian we talked about were the Hamitic type Indians. Now, these Indians were also dark-skinned, however, they had woolly hair. They usually went about with little to no clothes, and their practices were Hamitic in nature. And then the third type of Indians we reviewed were the Israel type Indians. And these Indians were dark-skinned, had woolly hair, wore clothes that resembled the Israelites, and practiced Israel-like type customs. All right, so those are the 3 types of Indians that we've reviewed so far. However, let's move on to our fourth type of Indian that's covered in the Meet the Indians video.